This week in Idle Heroes, Mystic Fairy Freya was nerfed, and a lot of people have been asking me in the community what my thoughts and opinions are. So I thought today I'd make a video discussing whether I think Mystic Fairy Freya is still going to be good, even though she's been nerfed. So today we'll be addressing the nerf and discussing what strengths and weaknesses she now has because of it. So this nerf matters because it has affected people's ability to deal damage in game modes like Star Expedition. So the ability in question that's been affected is Pistol of Stars. When you Noble Sublime this, Freya grants allies her effect to improve her damage dealt to poisoned opponents. Now this benefit is 33% of the benefit she gives to herself, so therefore she's giving 3.33% of damage to the targets each round. Now, this has been significantly altered because originally it was giving way too much damage dealt that it should have done, so now the benefit is true to the text. However, what that means is over the course of the fight, the heroes on your team are not getting as much of a damage increase to poisoned targets. Now, that has left some people saying they think Freya is now unusable because the main reason they had her on their account was for this final passive that massively boosts your damage. However, I would argue that this is not the only ability that makes Freya good, so to fully write her off your team because of this, well, I think that's foolish. What you need to do is ask yourself why Freya is on your team. If the only reason you're running her is to massively improve the damage of your main damage dealers to the poison targets, then maybe you've got a bit of a problem, because the reason Freya was used in that way is you could synergize her with the snake pet, and that would give you extra damage to poisoned targets. So combining this with Freya's buff meant that your major damage dealers were able to do a ton of damage to those poisoned opponents. As part of that, you would allow Freya to be the hero that attacks first, and then she can grant poison to the opponent, which means that even if the enemy has an ability to purify the poison away at the end of the round, Freya goes first, reapplies that poison, and that means your damage dealer who goes second is still getting the damage bonus to a poisoned opponent because Freya has repoisoned them. This all still works in the case of Freya, therefore you can still use Snake, she still poisons opponents, this strategy is still fine. It is just that the damage granted by Pistol of Stars has been decreased. So you may notice smaller numbers in things like Star Expedition, but that doesn't mean she's completely unusable now. As well, one of her key strengths is Evolutionary Factor Layer 1, which increases all allies' damage reduction and control immunity by 40 and 35% respectively. That is a huge bonus, which, assuming Freya can get her active skill, will allow your heroes to live in those earlier rounds before it is worn off. That is often enough rounds for you to establish other buffs that improve your damage reduction, or perhaps gain some shields from someone like Ailamak, or even long enough for you to lock down the opponent with someone like Betty. That ability to improve your control immunity and damage reduction should not be discredited. It is a very strong ability which people use to help them make progress in earlier rounds. On top of that, the second time she does an active skill, she's going to increase all allies' attack and she's going to grant them a shield. That shield adds to that survival strategy, which also helps to improve the longevity of your team. Not to mention, Freya also has the Veiling Branches ability, which means whenever any hero on your team attacks, they're going to improve their attack and all damage reduction. The key reason Freya is used on most teams is to grant survival to your heroes. It is not necessarily just about this final passive here on Evolutionary Factor. That means that you are still going to be gaining all the damage reduction, those small attack bonuses. You're still going to be gaining a shield every time someone releases a basic attack or active skill if you sublime that second passive. And not to mention, you're gaining the control immunity, damage reduction, and shield here for Evolutionary Factor levels 1 and 2. So overall, Freya is still a brilliant hero for keeping you alive. However, it does mean you don't necessarily need to make her Tree of Origin 5 anymore, because Freya's very presence on your team buffs your survival. That means teams that are rushing Freya to Tree of Origin 5 may not need to do that anymore, and you can actually save yourself some sublimation. This also makes it even less appealing to make Freya a Destiny hero, unless you were in a weird circumstance where you wanted her to be a Tenant. But that leads us to my next point. Freya isn't actually a Tenant for anyone that's significant. If we go ahead and click on her, you can see she's a Tenant for Vesa. Okay, fair enough. Vesa isn't really being used anymore, maybe as a secondary homeowner, but really if people are not going to invest in Freya as much, that just pushes Vesa even further away, because one of the main reasons to run Vesa as a secondary homeowner was just because you happen to have a Tree of Origin 5 Freya as well. Also, we have Azrael, and to be honest, no one really is using Azrael. I think the only person I know that's using one as a homeowner, I think I can name 2 people off the top of the head, and one of them is me, and I just do it for fun, so I don't necessarily think this is going to impact many people's decisions either. And on top of that, you've got Halora, and Halora really only wants to be in a house for the speed benefits, so it doesn't really matter what tenants you have. And I guess if you do have stronger tenants, like let's say you want to max out all your tenants to improve Halora's attack and HP, that is more of a luxury than a necessity. So the point I'm making is that Freya isn't really a tenant for anybody significant, which means it doesn't really matter that people aren't going to be pushing up to Tree of Origin 5 anymore. And I think that's fine. It just means people get to save their Stellar Shards and Spiritual Essence and their Sublimation. This is a good thing. It means you can invest in other heroes that you want to, and you don't feel as stretched thin. Because the thing with Freya is there are worlds where people only take Freya to Void 3, just so that they can gain the control immunity and damage reduction here. If you look, increases all allies damage reduction by 40%, doesn't even change when you go ahead and sublime this. The only thing that increases is you gain 10% more control immunity. So theoretically, Freya's defense abilities are absolutely fine, even at Void 3. So there are people who will just make Freya Void 3. The other defense ability she has, which we haven't mentioned yet, is also Mirage Pollen, which basically means basic or active skills released by the enemy who has been affected by Mirage Pollen has a chance to be dodged. This is great, because dodging opponents is actually one other way that you gain survival from Freya, and that is something that you gain without needing to massively improve her abilities. If you take a look here at Void 4, Mirage Pollen has a 35% chance to be dodged, but then if we go ahead and look what happens when you sublime it, it doesn't change. In fact, if we just go and look at a 10-star version, Mirage Pollen still says there's a 35% chance to dodge. So it doesn't matter the power level of your Freya, Mirage Pollen still does the exact same thing. It gives you a 35% chance to dodge the affected opponent's attacks. Now that's going to stack with other heroes like Elena, who also improve the dodge of your team, not to mention that any rangers you might have may be getting additional dodge benefits just from the treasure train. Also, there are heroes like Patricia who naturally improve their own dodge anyway, so still won't mind having a Freya on the team, because getting more dodge on Patricia means it's even more likely that she's going to survive. So there are plenty of reasons still to run Freya on your account, and the Elena and Freya dodge combo is definitely something that's still going to be meta relevant. But as we established, you don't need to massively invest in Freya to get those abilities. So I think what we're going to see more of is people using Freya as a lower level hero, someone that they don't need to invest a lot of Stellar Shards in. That means if you're someone who's using Lord of Fear Aspen, you can focus all of your Stellar Shards into getting Tree of Origin 5 on Lord of Fear Aspen and his 2 tenants, Halora and Elena. That means whatever leftover Stellar Shards you have can be put into Freya, but at most Void 3 is all you need to get the most out of her defensive abilities. And if you do decide to improve the tree on Freya, it's just because you want Veiling Branches to give even more all damage reduction, and you perhaps want to be getting those shield bonuses, and also a little bit of precision thrown in there too. But this is not by any means a necessary sublimation increase, and actually if I was looking to improve the survival of that team, I'd be looking towards Halora's passive 2, as this allows your team to heal. In fact, I much prefer this to Freya's now. I would rather get the active skill improved and the passive 2 and 3 on a Halora before I even start investing in Freya now. So I think there's definitely going to be people still using Freya. I think Freya is completely viable in the meta. And absolutely, if you want to maximize the damage increase that Freya gives your team, you still need to get to Tree of Origin 5 and nobly sublime her. But if you don't really care about massively improving your boss fight damage, then you maybe could pass on Freya's improvements and look elsewhere for your team. However, there is one big thing that's going to be affected by this, and that's going to be the Void campaign boss fights. For people that really needed that extra bit of damage from the rounds going on and on and on, then yeah, you guys are going to feel this Freya nerf, because it's going to make it harder for you to kill these Void invasion bosses. And that's going to be a problem, because it makes it more difficult for you guys to get Stellar Shards, Crystals of Transcendence, and more importantly, Destiny materials. However, there are other things that you can add to your account, and with the release of the brand new artifacts, I do think that you can probably mitigate that loss by getting yourself something like the Breath of Forest Spirit, which does have a massive skill damage improvement and is still just a better version of Antler's Cane. Not to mention it gives you all damage reduction and a little bit of healing. Now, I do like that artifact, but I'm not trying to say for a moment that it's going to completely mitigate the losses of the Freya, but it will potentially make life easier for people that are too worried that losing Freya is an issue. Now, maybe you don't want Freya on your account now. Maybe you want to look elsewhere for someone on your team. Well, you could consider DGN. Doppelganger Natalia is a fantastic support hero. She's giving defense and aggression to your highest attack hero, so she synergizes really well with the Idle Heroes strategy of putting everything into a single hero. So if you want to make your Lord of Fear Aspen or your Vulcan much stronger, you can run a Natalie with them, and thanks to Natalia's Bright Blessing ability, she's going to massively improve the performance of your highest attack hero. In fact, I really love using Natalia, and personally on this account you're looking at right here, I have an A-tier Natalia I use in conjunction with an A-tier Interstellar Huntress Patricia, and that combo is really, really fun. You get similar performance from using Natalia with Vulcan. In fact, that is probably stronger than using Patricia. So if you were looking for an alternative to Freya because you heard news of the nerf and you want to switch, then yeah, you could absolutely run a Natalia instead. Now, if looking for some other alternatives, obviously it's really good to have a Lamach on your team. I wouldn't even call this an alternative. I'd say you should absolutely be investing in this guy if you can. He is one of the best second homeowners in the game and gives you tons of shields and survival to your team, which is something similar to what Freya is trying to do. But if you do have a spare house that you're looking to put someone in, consider Bloodtide Queen Arania. Her tenants are Halora and Elena, so if you have those two support heroes sitting around as well, you can put a really nice support trio together, which is Arania, Elena, and Halora as well, where Bloodtide Queen Arania is actually the main homeowner, and she is benefiting by the bonuses you give her from those tenants. With your main damage dealer, which could, for example, be a Doom Terminator Vulcan, you could get some good progress, and if you have a third home as well with an Alomac in, you could get some really, really interesting things for your account, where you're using an Alomac, Bloodtide Queen Arania, and Doom Terminator Vulcan, all as 3 homeowners, getting tons of support to your team. And because you can only run 6 heroes on your account, dropping the Freya doesn't feel so bad. However, I will end by saying I don't think dropping Freya from all lineups is a good idea, and actually the main reason Freya was allowing a lot of 6-man lineups to do well is because of the defensiveness, not because of the damage given by Evolutionary Factor Layer 3. And actually, the only reason Layer 3 has been good is for game modes like Star Expedition and Void bosses. In the majority of things like Void Campaign, PvP, and also pushing things like the Realms Gate, Freya's strength does not come from Evolutionary Factor level 3, but rather levels 1 and 2, along with Veiling Branches and Mirage Pollen, because it is the survival she gives your team that is much more important than that small damage increase. So if you are thinking about dropping Freya from your team, you will notice a massive drop in survivability, which may just come down to the fact that you didn't realize how powerful her defensive abilities were. So before you go dropping Freya from your account, do bear in mind her defensive abilities are still absolutely fantastic and completely necessary for many lineups to make it past the first 3 rounds. And I personally would still strongly encourage people to use Freya. It is just good now that we are not necessarily forced to invest Freya to Tree of Origin 5, and you can comfortably make her Tree 4 or even less than that to allow her to give the benefits to your team. But do remember, Freya needs to live, so you will need other survival things to help that Freya survive, whether it's Elena giving extra dodge or an Alomac granting shields to your lineup. Keeping Freya alive to get multiple active skills to improve the defenses of your team is really, really important. So you may still want to invest in Freya's Tree of Origin, and don't forget the Tree of Origin improvements still grant you speed, so if you're leaning on a strategy where you want Freya to poison opponents before your main damage dealer goes, then you absolutely will want to invest in that Tree of Origin, and if that's a strategy you're leaning towards, you absolutely still want to go ahead and nobly sublime that final passive, because it still does improve your damage, it's just not as much as before, and getting as much damage as you possibly can into your team is still really, really important. So just because the damage number is smaller doesn't mean it's gone altogether. So I still think in many cases where you are trying to maximize every bit of damage you can do to a boss, whether it's the Star Expedition or the Void Invasion, you probably still want to invest in her if that's the strategy you're leaning towards. Let me know your thoughts about Freya and whether you think this change to the 3rd layer of Evolutionary Factor is going to be game-breaking for her. I personally think it's only going to have a small change, and I think people are still going to use her, but let me know what your thoughts and comments are down below. I'll see you next time, guys. Thank you for tuning in, and hopefully this has made you more aware of the nerf to Freya. I'll see you next time. Don't forget to subscribe, and of course, have an amazing week, and happy idling.